Good afternoon, everybody. We're very excited to be here. It's the first time that we do this together. We're going to bring you today the Photovoice project, which has been finished like last year, but still has some, how do you say it, waves afterwards. We're first going to introduce ourselves and then talk a little bit about the wider study we were part of, how we use Photovoice, and then we'll share some results and open certain parts of the discussion on gender and recovery and addiction and drug use.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start. I'm Tijs Van Steenberghe. That's how we say it in Dutch, but your pronunciation was actually quite good. I've been doing research at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts in Ghent in Belgium for the last like 10 years. My background is I'm a social worker, and I have been a professional photographer, which I quit because the combination of my work and that kind of work was too much. But in my spare time, I also did some photo projects in psychiatry. So I have the shared combination of social work background, research background, and at the same time, the kind of creative approach towards working together with people.
Okay.
No?
Okay. Hello, I'm Mandy Thomas. I am, wow, I don't really know what's important to share with you. I'm 34. So I'm a recovered drug addict. In September, I will be recovered for 14 years. Right now, I work as a social worker in a residential home with children. And I was one of the participants in this Photovoicing project. Yeah.
We also address the idea of different roles, because often we see in research you have this kind of divide between the researcher and the participant. And the interesting thing in this project, after a while, we started to talk different about our participants. In a way, we started to address them as photographers. Also, at a certain point throughout the project, we shared our own insecurities as researchers on how to proceed with the project, on how to analyze the data, on how to understand what we were doing. And at that time, you also feel a kind of different dynamic in becoming co-researcher. At the same time, I had the pleasure of guiding this process and also guiding them, how to say, to work with the photos. But at the same time, I also have some experience with the field of addiction. So I also felt at certain points that you become part of the process and you become part of the discussion. Yeah. The difficult thing with today is that, of course, the other one, is that there are so many interesting topics to talk about a Photovoice project that has been finished. We had some very interesting discussions on the participatory aspect of doing research together. Some interesting discussions on the concept of being a woman, of gender within the research. But today we're going to take out some slices and share some stories with you, also some insights. And hopefully it could be inspiring for your own work. So thank you very much. The wider project we were part of was the RECPAT study, funded by Eranit. We were with 6 partners throughout 4 countries, the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Scotland. There were different like methods in that research, from a big like online survey to interviews. And then the Photovoice we only did in Belgium. Part of the idea of the study was to get a big scope on recovery pathways in the drug use history, to understand the ways people can change and also maintain that change. Also have a view on policy and practice throughout those different countries. And of course, to see what we can learn about supporting those recovery pathways in the future. The idea of the Photovoice project was really to go into depth with 6 to 8 women who were part of the process, and start from their first person perspectives to understand in a way like how are their recovery pathways shaped. An interesting starting point for the project was to see or to understand that the concept of gender has long been ignored in addiction research. Also, if you look at treatment settings, there was a strong focus on the male in a way. And in that way, the concept of recovery and also recovery capital, 2 of the central concepts we worked with, are also gendered concepts. there have been some studies which just revealed that there is no attention towards or no awareness towards that there can be differences between men and women. Those differences can relate to different barriers. For example, the presence of child support, access to services, also different experiences related to social control and stigma. And also sometimes in some studies we see that women address that they experience sometimes more mental health problems or abuse in relation to their male counterparts. For me, one of the interesting things that I discovered throughout the research, these kind of contradictions of the female drug use, in a way that female drug users at the same time are sometimes framed as a victim, but also as a criminal, are portrayed as good and as bad at the same time. And I think these contradictions were very interesting for us to take within the research and try to understand like what's really happening there. Another one for me that was very enlightening was the paradox of motherhood, especially in the idea of recovery capital, which is based on the idea of social capital. And the simple idea is that like you have a kind of personal capital, social capital, and community capital. And the idea is that if people have more capital, they have more chances to succeed in their recovery. Now, the interesting thing about that paradox of motherhood is that, in a way, motherhood can be a motivation, it can be a certain form of capital to start your recovery pathway or to support your recovery pathway. But at the same time, in our society, there's a very strong stigma towards mothers who use drugs or have drug use history. So, in the same time, you see that this motherhood can have a positive effect on your capital. At the same time, there's very negative capital associated with it. Another thing I actually struggled with throughout the project is you focus on that concept of gender and womanhood and motherhood, but there is no essential female recovery experience. There's a danger in this kind of research that we look everything through the lens of gender and then losing sight of other social structures that cross that kind of inclusion and exclusion. Part of the discussion with my co-author was also, is it for me as a male possible to guide this kind of process, of the only females need to be part of it? How do you look at this kind of cooperation together? But how can we also work with the concept without framing everything within the identity of being a woman? That's has been part of the struggle, actually. Of course, every photo that you see throughout the presentation is made by our photographers. And further on, we'll take some time to talk about some together with Mandy. Let me see what's next. Of course, the big question of the research project was, how do women themselves experience their recovery pathways? And for us, the lens or the perspective was to try to understand, okay, in what ways does that capital, that recovery capital, initiate those recovery pathways? How does it support it? How does it inhibit those recovery processes? That's where we started.
Yes.
That's where we started. The thing also with participatory research is, if you do it right, you start somewhere, but not really sure where you get. And throughout the process, we always have to find ways to translate our own questions and way of thinking in a way that it was accessible for everybody to take part of it and talk about it. Okay, very briefly about Photovoice, like what is it and how did you use it? It's a method for participatory action research. And in a very simple way, it's people take pictures from in their own life world, in their own daily environments, in their day-to-day life, and bring them back in group to discuss with each other. The focus for us in this kind of research is in a way to establish that personal change, but never always stay attentive toward that idea of change in society. I think the difficult part sometimes with this kind of participatory projects is that those projects in itself can be very meaningful for the people that take part in it, but we often maybe forget to go outside and involve in public in it, to address certain issues that are in the community, to address certain wider structural problems in society. An important aspect also of Photovoice is that we move ourselves towards that first perspective and create a space to listen and give platform to those voices that often are not heard or not seen within different kind of contexts. And also an important part for us in how we work with Photovoice is the idea to promote that dialogue, not only within the group, but also with a wider community or wider society, as well on those personal and on those community issues. So throughout the project, we always try to address or be attentive toward personal experiences, but in a way not stay stuck in those personal experiences, but try to connect those experiences towards more wider discussions on like what's going on within recovery, within addiction research, within addiction practice. Now, why do we find it so important? If you look at research and academic practice, there is a long history of, how do you say it, of professional academic knowledge, where you feel that there were like these kind of unequal power balances and whose voices are heard, who has this kind of mandate to speak, who has the kind of also material resources to be present in certain platforms. It's also very happy that Mandy is here. But Photovoice for us is also a way to acknowledge that lived experiences, that they are legitimate and also a critical source of knowledge. Also the way we work with Photovoice is also based on our own research experiences in our research group, that often we have the feeling that when we go, you have a research, you do focus groups, you do interviews, you take from people where you often give so little back. And in this way of working will also for a way of creating a process that is meaningful for people themselves. I think for us, it was also very interesting to think about, okay, these projects are often written in advance without people themselves, which is a very interesting tension if you talk about participatory research in itself. But from the moment we started the process, we actually tried to engage our group in thinking about the focus of the project, thinking about data analysis, trying to find meaning together in what we were doing. Another aspect of why Photovoice for us is an interesting way of working is to widen identities. Also, in the way we talk about or doing research and working together with people, we often refer to clients or participants, and after a while we noticed we started to talk about photographers, and not in their identity of being just a participant, they became a different part of our research. And also a very interesting or for us important part of Photovoice, but also very challenging, is once you do these kind of group sessions, you take the photos, you support the creative part, you bring it back in the group, you discuss it, you create the content together, is then the step of making it public and finding ways to bring those stories out there and connect them with a wider audience. And what they also mean in a wider audience, I think certain challenge within professional practice and academia is that we're always talking to the same people. We're always reaching those who agree with us. And part of Photovoice is also trying to reach those who feel more distant, who are not always agreeing with how we look at certain stuff. Yeah? I'm getting warmed up, I feel. Some of the results. We were not able to share all the results. At the end of the presentation, there's a link, because we also made a website with the photos, with the quotes, with the content of the project. This is actually one of my favorite photos if I see it back. The idea of recovery is looking ahead while you're looking back, so it's, yeah. An interesting part in the project was we started from the idea of recovery capital. And our first idea was to bring the content within that structure, to look at the photos and the discussions and bring them into the idea of personal capital, community capital. But then, of course, it contradicts in a way with how we perceive that kind of capital, and those recovery capital is always like connected with each other. It's always changing throughout time, it influences each other. So after the research, we tried to find ways based on the stories, the experiences, the quotes, different kind of content where we could talk about what shapes these recovery pathways, what is important for the photographers. And there you see four main topics. And I think the interesting thing is that each topic in itself holds that dynamic of that personal, social, community capital. Each topic also addresses gender in a way. We're not going to talk about each topic, I think that would take us too far, but we're going to take one topic in combination with one photo, and Mandy will share an experience, a story, an opinion on that topic and photo, yeah?
Yeah.
Maybe very briefly, the idea of rebuilding me is connected to that kind of personal work. untangling life and addiction is finding your way in society and also finding your way in understanding that certain life issues are life issues and not everything is connected to that lens of addiction. Becoming reconnected is, I think for me, the challenge of becoming connected with yourself again, but also becoming reconnected with certain family members or friends, which could have been hurt throughout the process, but also becoming connected again, I think, with wider society. And the last one, connecting perspectives, is about an important part, I think, in recovery is thinking about the future. But we specifically chose the word enacting because you can have dreams, but you also need resources sometimes, some support to reach that dreams. So enacting for us is not only that individual motivation, but also stresses the importance of the more like community support also in getting there. Are you ready, Mandy? The rebuilding me.
I think so. Okay, so I took this picture. One of the important things in my recovery was finding some sense of self-worth, that I am good enough to take care of myself. I'm good enough to have a good life, to not slowly kill myself with a drug and destroy my life. So when it was actually one of the most important things that I needed to learn and rebuild. And I went into a therapeutic program for, I think, 9 months. And a way they tried to help me was, well, we want you to give yourself a compliment every day, which sounds small and easy, but it was actually really difficult. So I started with really, really small things, like I got up on time today. And then thinking back, one of the compliments I started to give myself was the amount of food I was consuming, because I used to be, before my drug use, I used to be heavier in weight, which was, it made me insecure because I thought I didn't fit into the beauty standard that was expected of young women or women in general. And then because of my drug use, I lost a lot of weight, which I perceived as a positive thing, and I didn't want to lose it. So I was afraid if I stopped using this drug, I will start regaining this weight. Therefore, I will be not worthy again, and I will be not good enough. So the contradiction with the compliment is I was giving myself a compliment to not gain the weight because I was afraid I will not be good enough again. And the guides from the therapeutic program said, oh, you're doing a really good job, you're giving yourself compliments. But now thinking back, they never talked to me about what is your fear and how is your relationship with your body and why do you identify yourself with your body so much. So yeah, that's why I took this picture.
For us, it was very fascinating or interesting to see that even within treatment settings, there is this kind of support of this kind of beauty ideal, which keeps people also stuck in this dynamic of self-worth or not. And also one of the compliments you gave, like I'm only eating one piece of bread with the chocolate. Which for us also shows that like the personal struggle at the same time the social or community resources that are actually reinforcing that beauty ideals within a treatment setting, which like makes it more difficult in a way to go to the core of that recovery and what's in there.
Right. So untangling what is life and addiction. I remember, so I'm very much aware that I will struggle with my recovery for the rest of my life. It gets easier. I don't have to be so intensely aware of everything that I do. But I'm still very much aware. And if I experience trouble with showing emotions or having a hard day, my mind always goes to the addiction part and is always scared that I am still connected to very much to that part. And then I went to a friend who was having a hard time, and while I was listening to her, I realized she's actually experiencing exactly the same thing as I am. So not everything that I experience in life has something to do with this addiction. Some things are just life.
Yeah. And while you're talking, I'm also remembering that I think it's not only a challenge for yourself to find a way within life issues and drug issues and addiction issues, but at the same time, it's also a challenge for your environment. But I do remember one of the stories that, like you're saying, from whenever when you're saying I'm feeling bad, there's this kind of response for your environment, like, is everything okay? Are you like falling back again? Is it happening again? But you also like give stress towards your own, and can be very tiring to always be addressed on that identity of being an addict or an ex-addict. So I think finding ways to support that untangling is also kind of the identity work, and learning to see yourself not only as an ex-addict, but also just as a human which has maybe sometimes some life issues and struggles. But it can be quite challenging also for the environment, I realize now, to also untangle that kind of perspective of the other as just Mandy, not with, and like, yeah.
It's also, I thought, I know other women, there are other women that have been addicted, but it's not like I come, like in the day-to-day life, I don't talk to them all the time. So I have this idea like, if I want to talk about my problems, I have to talk with people who struggle with addiction as well, because they will understand, they have experienced it, but actually also people that don't struggle with addiction can be very helpful, and I can also be helpful for them because we are having difficulties on the same parts of life.
You have 5 minutes left.
Oh, kies maar. Oh,
that's okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, normally we still have two photos to discuss. Is it okay for you if we go to some discussion maybe to end this? I'm just going to show the pictures for a moment, and you can figure out yourself what they may address or not address. Discussion. Just very briefly about this. This picture was made by also one of our photographers, and she often had the feeling that she wanted to change. I wanted to start her recovery, but at the same time was inhibited by the kind of surroundings she was living in. She was living in a very, how do you say it, deprived area in a way, not a lot of resources, and a kind of view of life, which made people also think that there was nothing else for them. And she made this picture like the green light at the stop sign at the same time, like feeling stuck in a way, wanting to change, but at the same time not having the kind of resources available to make that change like last and stay. I think for me, for us, one of the more interesting things that I learned throughout the process was especially that double-edged sword of cultural capital. And we know about recovery capital that can be positive, can be negative. But for me, it was quite interesting to see how addressing certain social norms and certain values within society, especially in relation to womanhood, motherhood, and those kind of weight, self-esteem, beauty ideals, are so double-edged. I think the idea of that social capital in a broad way was that it is positive in general, but here we see that kind of cultural capital can be very, very inhibiting towards people in their recovery process. Another interesting thing is that kind of sources of recovery capital are not fixed. They change throughout time. They can change throughout time. For example, when you have a kind of a certain connection with a friend, which can be very supportive at a certain point, can become something else like afterwards. So I think as practice and policy, being attentive towards this kind of dynamic nature of that kind of sources, I think opens up always the question to stay connected with the people you're working with and keep on listening and understanding what's going on. And I think especially as a society or community, it's always thinking about your own responsibility towards how can we support these recovery processes in a helpful way. We noticed also that those beauty ideals or expectations towards what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a mother has a very big impact on those recovery pathways. And for me, understanding or trying to understand what it means to those concepts of the good mother and the divine woman has for me been very interesting, because in a way I learned that you're only like fully a woman when you become a mother. But at the same time, when you're a mother with a drug whose history, you are scrutinized and controlled and experience a lot of stigma. So there's these kind of impossible expectations towards fulfilling your destiny as a woman, as a mother, but at the same time being scrutinized for being a mother with a drug whose history is such an impossible position to be in. Another one which I found very, very treffend, very interesting, was the idea of being vigilant. And recovery itself, always the idea also addressed it, like being aware of your own patterns and your own what's going on. But at the same time, when you become a mother, one of our participants told that she had to be even more vigilant. For example, when you're at the school gates talking with certain parents, connecting, wondering like, should I share my history or not? Because you also want to be honest about yourself and share who you are and what you've been through. But then thinking about what does it mean for my children? Because it's possible if you share this with certain friends, you know that their behavior changes, that they reject you. And we also heard stories about children that are not welcome anymore in other houses because mom has a kind of drug use history. So this kind of being vigilant, especially as a mother, makes it even more difficult in that recovery process, being attentive, being aware all the time. And one last thing, for us, that working with Photovoice in a way was more than a research method. I think when we look back at the process, the kind of group dynamic that was there was very, very resembling toward like the dynamic of self-help groups, a kind of belonging, membership, also a safe space to share stories, to share worries, to become connected with each other. I hope that the Photovoice and the making of the photos and discussing in group also like supported feelings of agency, but also finding ways to express yourself. And in a way, for some, being part of the research has like also supported their own recovery work. And then one of them, I'm very happy that this project actually led also to an art exhibition in the museum in Ghent. We had an article in the media. We created the photo book. I brought the photo book and I wanted to. You have one? But I wanted to give it around so people could feel it and then. Well, it's okay. I can take it. I wanted to give it around, but it's closed. I can give an open version. Don't worry. Because like this creation of an art exhibition, the article, the website, the photo book also give a kind of recognition to the work we did together and also makes it public. Yeah. You take the last words, no?
No, that's fine.
Thank you very much. And if you have the time, please visit the website. You find all the pictures there, the quotes there, all the origin of the content is there. On the starting page, there is also a kind of short movie with all the pictures and the teams and the sub-teams. Yeah, thanks so much for the time and yeah.
Thank you.